My name is Scout. I am a sophomore majoring in entertainment design at my university. Daisy and I came together and recorded this podcast discussing our personal experience at the protest and how social media and documentation of racial disparities implemented in and benefited by whites in our institutions in the United States can spread awareness to the masses and push for change. I just wanted to add the disclaimer that although I am turning this project in as a class final, we did not attend this protest as a way of getting a grade. It was genuinely a plan to go to this protest with the intentions and beliefs to speak up against police brutality, our racist and corrupt institutions, Black lives, and to support the Black Lives Matter movement. Because I am a design major, I have less access to sociology classes, human services, or any other courses that give students the guidance and access to talk about racial disparities in our system of oppression in today's society. However, with the influence of social media and historical documentaries in today's age, I'm able to have access to current events, propaganda, news, all kinds of media that deals with shining a light on the truth of what Black people in the US have been fighting for 400 plus years: human rights. It is difficult to get this kind of unfiltered exposure as a white person with the privilege of not experiencing prejudice and discrimination that people of color do firsthand. And I remember growing up in a time where we didn't have phones or social media platforms where we were exposed to this truth like we are today. All that we had was reliability of biased news, or our parents, our school systems, our teachers, people that we grew up surrounded by. But now we have this huge platform of Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Netflix, that carry all different kinds of perspectives and experiences from all backgrounds of people. We are able to be exposed to what is really happening in our society right now. Recently, with Black Lives Matter protests, there has been countless videos and plenty of articles written surrounding the propaganda with police brutality. There's this one example that shows the police posing and kneeling down with the protesters to commemorate the memory of George Floyd, one of the many Black Americans who was unfortunately killed at the fault of racist police brutality. After media outlets got this photo to broadcast to the public to show how our police are so great, it is stated by protesters 20 minutes later, those same police tear-gassed people in the face. And the only reason why people found out about that wasn't because channels were broadcasting it, but because people who were a part of the protesting recorded it and shared it with their friends, who shared it with their friends, and it spread like wildfire. That is just one example amongst many that is happening in cities all around our country every day. Now, from the Black Lives Matter protests that Daisy and I experienced in North Bend that was beautifully organized by high school students, thankfully remained peaceful without the violence against protesters seen erupting at some of the other protests that are happening around our country. However, we were still surrounded by more police than I have ever seen in such a small area. These cops were less than respectful of the protesters that were there for peace and support. What I mean by that is, there were some cops that objectively had an overall negative and unsupportive attitude of the protesters. There were cops on literal tops of buildings looking down at all of us. If that isn't a perfect representation of the corrupt hierarchy that the police system holds against the people they claim to protect and serve, then I don't know what is. Not only that, but when people at the protest were taking a knee in solidarity for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the same amount of time that George Floyd was pinned to the ground with a knee on his neck by a police officer saying the words, "I can't breathe," not a single cop took a knee. They just stood there, leisurely leaning on buildings or standing on top of them while looking down at all of us. To top it off, when we were chanting the names of innocent Black victims that were taken from this world at the hands of police, not a single cop was chanting with us. I documented some of the moments of this protest, and the feelings from this first protest was just fuel that I will use for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And you know, this kind of violence through police brutality that is documented today is basically a mirror image of the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. One of the biggest reasons why the more US citizens, not everyone of course, but a lot more people transformed their opinions on the civil rights movement was because they saw it. Police brutality against protesters clearly showed them using aggressive dogs, fire hoses, and beating sticks in the news that was nationally broadcasted for everyone to see. This started a major transformation in the American people's opinions about enforcing segregation, treatment of Black people in their society, how they viewed white supremacy, and their values of basic human rights. This major shift probably wouldn't have happened in that time if it wasn't broadcasted to the masses. This goes to show the impact that documentation has on what is seen as socially acceptable in this country. People's opinions are still greatly impacted on their access to news outlets, social media, the documentaries in the year 2020, just as they were during the civil rights movement. The more people are exposed to unfiltered documentation of current events, like they tend to be broadcasted through social media and documentaries, are more likely to develop informed opinions about basic human rights and systemic racism. News outlets are notorious for broadcasting information from a specific political standpoint, and while social media platforms are not free of biases, they do provide a space for more perspectives and are therefore arguably more holistic in the portrayal of current events. The realities of this country's foundation of deeply rooted white supremacy and racism is often silenced by the dominant identities that benefit from maintaining the oppressive structure as it is. Some things we can do as a society is to stop silencing Black voices and to support them instead. Educate ourselves in the history of oppression our country is plagued by. Speak out against forces of oppression and demand systemic reform and change through signing petitions, and if you are able, attending protests and city council meetings. And normalize changing your opinion when new information is presented.